Okay, reading on. Yud Gimel. Vehu Kibetz, that he joined together, and this person we're still referring to is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Kol Hashmuot, all the sayings, Vechol Hadinim, and all the rulings, Vechol Chabeorin, and all the teachings, Vecha Perushin, and the explanations or the commentaries, Sheshamru Mimosh Rabbeinu, that we heard from our teacher Moses. Veshilemdu Beidin Shel Kol Dor V'Dor, and what the Beidin taught us through all these generations, Bechol HaTorah Kula, about the whole Torah. Mehiber Mehakol, he joined all this in Sefer HaMishnah, in the book of the Mishnah. Veshinu Barabim, and this he repeated to the masses. V'nigla Lechol Yisrael, and he revealed it to Israel. Uktavuchu Kulam, who all wrote it down also. Veritzu Bechol Makom, and they spread it all over the place. Kedei shelo tishtakach, in order that it shouldn't be forgotten. Torah Shebal Peh MiYisrael, the oral law from Israel. Velama asa Rabbeinu HaKadosh kach, for what purpose did Rabbeinu HaKadosh do this for? Velo chaniach hadavar kemo shechaya, and not leave it how it was. Lipi sherash talmidim, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, by seeing that the students mitmatim vecholchin, were on a path of shrinking, v'hatzarot mitchadshot uvaot, and that problems were arising and they were coming, umamlechet harisha, and an evil kingdom, poshetet be'olam, was spreading all through the world, umit geberet, and was very powerful. V'Yisrael mit gadgalin, and Israel was being spread, v'cholchin laksaot, and wandering to the edges of the world. Hiber hibur echad liyot beyad kulam, and he, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he composed it all into one, liyot beyad kulam, to hand it to everyone. Kadei shelo tishtakach, in order that it should not be forgotten. Torah Shebal Peh MiYisrael, the oral law from Israel. Kadei sheyilmeduchu b'mhera velo yishakach, in order that it should be studied quickly and not forgotten. V'yashav kol yamav, in all the days of his life, hu ve'dino, he and his court, v'limed chamishna barabim, they taught this Mishnah to everyone. And friends, it really makes you wonder, what was the Rambam thinking when he was writing this, when he was retelling this narrative? And why do I ask? Because, friends, I'm sure that the Rambam himself felt that his great work, the one that we're reading from now, is actually the completion of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's vision. In other words, through the Mishneh Torah, the mission was completed. It was accomplished. The rulings of the Beit Din HaGadol were preserved in an understandable, practical form, which is the main reason that the Rambam is so highly praised nowadays, not only because of his genius, but because he was the only individual who ever codified all of the rulings of the great Sanhedrin in 14 volumes. Okay? Reading on. Okay, Tet Vav. Ve'eluchem gadolei chachamim, and these were the great wise men. Shechayu bevei dino shel Rabbeinu HaKadosh ve'kiblu mimenu, that were in Rabbeinu HaKadosh's Beit Din and received it from him. And again, we're talking about here the oral tradition. Shimon ben Gamliel banav, Shimon the son of Gamliel, his sons, Rabbi Afas, Rabbi Hanania ben Chama, Rabbi Hiya berav, and Rabbi Hiya and Rav, Rabbi Yanai, Uvar Kapora and Bar Kapora, Ushmuel and Samuel, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Hoshaya, Eluhem Hagdolim shekiblu mimenu, and these are the great ones that received it from him. Ve'imachem alafim urvavot mishar chachamim, along with many thousands of other wise men that received it from him. From him, meaning Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And this, my friends, alludes to the care that was taken to make sure that what was being preserved was derived from an authoritative source. I mean, what other belief system has taken the time or paid so much attention to detail? But still, friends, even today, most individuals, including many ethnic Jews, still have the audacity to write out the whole work with one statement, that the rabbis just made it up. Okay, reading on. Tet Zion. אף על פי מי שאלו, האחד עשר קיבלו מרבנו הקדוש ויעמדו במדרשו. Even though these 11 sages received the tradition from Rabbeinu HaKadosh himself and attended his study classes, Rabbi Yochanan Katan Chaya. Rabbi Yochanan, he was the smaller one. Ve'achar kach Talmid Chaya le Rabbi Yanai. And after this, he became the student of Rabbi Yanai. Ve'kibel mimenu Torah, and received Torah from him. Ve'chen Rab kibel me Rabbi Yanai, and also Rab received it from Rabbi Yanai. Ushmuel kibel me Rabbi Hananya ben Chama, and Samuel received it from Rabbi Hananya ben Chama. And friends, there's a misconception that I have to clear up. Many people think that the oral tradition that was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was oral till it was put down on paper or compiled in the Mishnah. Actually, this was not so. In every generation, my friends, the students of the sages took notes, and within that body of notes is how Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi created or compiled the Mishnah. And I think it's going to mention this soon also. Anyways, reading on. Rav Chiber Sifra v'Sifrei. And Rav, he composed the Sifra and the Sifri. Leva er ulcholdia ikrecha Mishnah, to explain and to let us know the sources for the Mishnah. Rabbi Chiya chiber hatosefta, and Rabbi Chiya composed the Tosefta. Leva er inyanecha Mishnah, to explain, to clarify the matters of the Mishnah. V'chen Rabbi Choshaya u'Bar Kapara, and Rabbi Choshaya and Bar Kapara, Hebrew Braitot leva'er divrei Mishnah. They joined the Brisas to explain the words of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan chiber haTalmud haYerushalmi, and Rabbi Yochanan, he composed the Jerusalem Talmud, the Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, achar Churban Chabayit, after the destruction of the temple, bekarov mishlosh me'ot shana, approximately 300 years after. And friends, this really explains an area that people skip. People think that all of practical halacha is only contained within the Talmud Babli alone. Well, friends, the truth is that the Babylonian Talmud didn't cover all of the 6 orders or sections of the Mishnah. And here we see him mentioning the other works that did, the Sifra, the Sifri, and even the Talmud Yerushalmi and more, that for some reason everyone skips today when trying to understand halacha. And this is one of the main reasons that the Yad HaChazaka is head and shoulders above the other codifications. Apart from being the only complete codification, it's derived, compiled, and codified practical halacha from all the valid sources, which also tells us that he, the Rambam, was familiar with the full body of halacha. And the reason this is important, friends, and the reason this, if anything, is the main reason that the later codifications like the Shulchan Aruch are and will always remain inferior, is because many, many times you really can't truly understand a halachic ruling without first being familiar with all of halacha. Because many times, for example, we find statements in Hilchot Shchita that sheds light on something in Hilchot Shabbat, and this is actually one of the main reasons that many rabbis state nowadays that the Rambam sometimes makes up halachot out of thin air. Why? Because they don't learn the other sources of Jewish law, so are ignorant in the fact. Okay? Reading on. Okay, Yud Chet. Umigdolei chachamim shekiblu me'Rav u'Shmuel, from the greatest of the wise men that received the oral law, the oral tradition, from Rav and Samuel, were Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, Rav Nachman, Rav Kahana. Umigdolei chachamim shekiblu me'Rabbi Yochanan, and from among the wisest of the sages that received it from Rabbi Yochanan were Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Dimi, Rabun. Okay, Yud Tet. Umiklal chachamim shekiblu me'Rav Huna, ume'Rav Yehuda, and from amongst the wise men that received the oral tradition from Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda were Rabba, Rav Yosef, Rabba and Rav Yosef, umiklal chachamim shekiblu me'Rabba, Rav Yosef. And from among the wise men that received the oral law from Rava and Rav Yosef were Abaye ve'Rava. They were Abaye and Rava. Ushnehem kiblu gam me'Rav Nachman, and the both of them received the tradition also from Rav Nachman. Umichlal chachamim shekiblu me'Rava And from among those wise men, they received the tradition from Rava, Rav Ashi, Ravina, were Rav Ashi and Ravina. Now, this is the famous Rav Ashi, one of the compilers of the Babylonian Talmud. And again, friends, the Babylonian Talmud is the Mishneh with its commentary, the Gemara. Really a sort of codification in itself, but really not quite. Okay, reading on. Umar bar Rav Ashi, and Mar, the son of Ashi, Kibel Ma'aviv, Rav Ashi, he received it from his father, Rav Ashi, Ume Ravina, and Ravina. Nimtza me Rav Ashi ad Moshe Rabbeinu. You will find that from between Rav Ashi to Moshe Rabbeinu, Arba'im Ish, they were 40 people who had the tradition. Ve'eluchen, and they were Rav Ashi, Merava, Merabam, Merav Chuna, Merabi Yochanan, Merav Shmuel, Merabana, Merabenu HaKadosh, Meraban Shimon Aviv, Rabbi Shimon and his father, Meraban Gamliel Aviv, Meraban Shimon Aviv, Meraban Gamliel Chazaken Aviv, Meraban Shimon Aviv, Mechilo Aviv Veshamai, Mishamaya ve'Avtalion, Yehuda ve'Shimon, Michoshea ve'Nita, Yosef ve'Yosef, Antignas, Shimon Chazaken, Ezra, Baruch, Yirmiyah, Tzfania, Chavakuk, Nahum, Yoel, Micha, Yoshaya, Amos, Hoshea, Zechariah, Yochada, Elisha, Eliyahu, Achia, David, Shmuel, Eli, Pinchas, Yoshua, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabam Shel Kol Hanviim, and from Moshe Rabbeinu, the teacher of all the prophets, Me'im Adonai Elohei Yisrael, and from Hashem, the God of Israel. And friends, I really think it's interesting how the Rambam refers to Moshe Rabbeinu as the teacher of all the prophets. And this really hits on an idea that I've mentioned in other videos on how, because Moshe is the teacher of all the prophets, what they, the prophets, are teaching cannot deviate from the words of Moshe. And I know many of you are thinking that this sounds very elementary, but if you think about it, virtually every false movement that exists today, from Christianity to Kabbalistic Judaism, never builds their ideas on the words of Moshe, but rather on the esoteric speech of some prophet, which, like we just said, could never contradict the written Torah in the first place, and also no one could really know for sure what they're saying. In other words, if it's not derived from Torah or the avenue the Torah sanctioned, like the Sanhedrin, my friends, it's not Judaism. Okay? Reading on.